Richard Berman, a Clinton-appointed New York judge, has declined to release grand jury evidence and testimony regarding the Jeffrey Epstein case to the general public. My name is Peter Wiggin, and today I will be breaking down the latest news on the situation, its political implications, and where we go from here on the Jeffrey Epstein case. Before we get into it, I wanted to give a little background if anybody has been living under the rock over the course of the past couple months. But what has been going on with the Epstein case recently? Just a couple months ago, we had Trump coming out saying, oh, it's a nothing burger. There's nothing here. The Epstein files don't exist. Actually, they do exist in some form, but it's the Democrats that created the Epstein files, and they're a hoax implicating me and implicating other hardworking, fighting for freedom Republicans in its wake. Pam Bondi came out saying, yeah, there are no Epstein files. The 10,000 hours of child pornography that were found to be possessed by Jeffrey Epstein were actually videos downloaded from the internet. You know, we aren't going to search through them. We aren't going to see if we can corroborate names and faces with the actual victims that Epstein trafficked across state lines into his island, Little St. James. But we're just going to tell you that, yeah, it was actually a nothing burger the whole time. Kash Patel went on the Joe Rogan Experience looking afraid like a ghost, looking like he was shaking his boots and saying, hey, Joe, if I had the information, wouldn't you think I would give it to you? And Joe just standing there, sitting there stunned, saying, actually, no, I don't think you would. I don't believe you would. So in the wake of all of this, there's been news coming out saying, actually, the grand juries are being subpoenaed, if that's the right word for it. There have been requests made to the grand juries involved in some of these trials regarding Jeffrey Epstein and his confidant, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is currently in prison serving a 20-year sentence, requesting the notes, the minutes, and the evidence that was discussed in the grand jury trials. And we've gotten some news back from the grand jury in Florida. And we recently, just today actually, Wednesday the 20th, 2025, Clinton-appointed Judge Richard Berman, who is a district judge in the Southern District of New York, regarding his thoughts on the situation. And so today I wanted to pull up a CBS News article titled, Judge Declines to Unseal Grand Jury Material in Jeffrey Epstein Case. And so we'll start reading this. There's some valuable information, and I want to cross-reference it with some actual court evidence, some of the actual minutes that were posted, and the conclusions in the actual 14-page document that the judge released to the public. So the first paragraph starts by saying, a federal judge in New York on Wednesday declined the Justice Department's request to unseal grand jury material in the case of late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, saying prosecutors had failed to demonstrate that special circumstances warranted the disclosure. So usually grand jury minutes and information aren't released to the general public. It usually doesn't happen. And so when the request was made for this information to be released, it was under the guise of, this is a special circumstance. It's an extenuating circumstance. The public needs to have this information. It needs to be made clear. These strings, these loose ends need to be tied up. So just throw us a bone, release this information to the general public, and we'll all go on with our days happy. Judge Richard Berman of the U.S. Court for the Southern District of New York issued his ruling in a 14-page decision denying the government's motion to unseal the documents. Berman wrote that the grand jury material in question includes the testimony of just a single witness, an FBI agent who had no direct knowledge of the facts of the case and whose testimony was mostly hearsay. The documents the government was seeking to unseal included roughly 70 pages of transcripts of the agent's two presentations to the grand jury, a PowerPoint exhibit, and a call log. So what CBS is saying right here, that Richard Berman is saying, and I'll show you the actual words in the transcript so it's not just like a third-party source right here, but what he's saying is that, what CBS is saying is that Richard Berman said, yeah, we had one guy testifying, he was an FBI agent, but what he was saying was mostly hearsay. That doesn't comfort me. I'm sorry, that actually makes me wonder a bit more as to what was said. What did this FBI agent inform on? What was the conclusions that he was making in front of the jury? What was he postulating? It's just making me more curious. What's behind the curtain? What are you hiding? Is it really a nothing burger? So Richard Berman also states a significant and compelling reason to reject the government's position in this litigation is that the government has already undertaken a comprehensive investigation into the Epstein case and, not surprisingly, has assembled a trove of Epstein documents, interviews, and exhibits. And the government committed that it would share its Epstein investigation materials with the public, Berman wrote. The government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public about the Epstein files. By comparison, the instant grand jury motion appears to be a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files in the government's possession, Berman wrote, quoting a decision by another judge in New York who denied the government's move to unseal material in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's co-conspirator who was serving a 20-year sentence on sex trafficking charges. Now, I'm going to come out and I'm going to say that that's true. As much as I hate to say it, the spotlight that is being placed on Berman, the spotlight that is being placed on these district court judges releasing this grand jury information is a diversion from the breadth and scope of Epstein files in the government's possession. But two things can be true at once. The jury files can be released and should be released, and also the government should release the information that they have. And so I wanted to go into this 14-page document. I can leave a link in the description. If you want to leave a comment on this video, I can link it. It's pretty easy to find online. But in section 3, the discussion, I wanted to read a quick paragraph pretty much outlining what we've talked about before, but it says, the government concedes that it cannot meet any of the exceptions specified in Rule 6E. Rather, the government contends that unsealing is warranted under a particular special condition, namely a public interest exception. The grand jury testimony is not a matter of significant historical or public interest, far from it. There is certainly and appropriately a lot of discussion about the Epstein case, and for that reason, the court is proceeding to evaluate the validity of the government's special condition claim under the 9 In re Craig factors. And then it goes on to talk about what exactly those are. And so it's like, there's a special condition that is being requested. We can't really grant it. We need to evaluate it a bit more, whatever that means in very convoluted legal speak, right? And then I'll go on a couple paragraphs later. There is another compelling reason not to unseal the Epstein grand jury materials at this time, namely possible threats to victim safety and privacy. We've heard this a lot before. If you've been on the internet for a day, if you've been on the internet and have read anything about the Epstein trial, read anything about the files being released, this is always an excuse that is cited. The court received a very compelling letter dated August 5th, 2025 from 3 leading victims' right attorneys who have stated any disclosure of grand jury material, especially material that could expose or help identify victims in any way, directly affects the CVRA's fairness, privacy, conferral, and protection guarantees. These attorneys represent numerous survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, including several individuals whose names and identifying information appear in the subject materials. Victims did not have sufficient notice before the government filed the instant motions to unseal. And so those are the two big reasons as to why this information hasn't been released, or the release was rejected by Richard Berman, this judge. One being, this isn't actually a special circumstance. Sure, it's a big thing in the news, but it's not something that we need to release. You know, the government has all the information about this. The government should release this information. That isn't our job. The government, through the Justice Department, should make this clear to the general public what's going on. It's not my job as a district judge to release these sealed grand jury documents. Far from it. And if I did release it, it would be compromising for the victims. And some may say this is a compelling argument. I'd like to disagree. I always hear about the privacy of the victims as an excuse that information hasn't been released. Privacy is important, of course, especially since the victims have already suffered so much. However, have there been any victims that have come out expressing frustration about the lack of released materials? Should we listen to the victims that have spoken out about this fact? I think that their testimony, I think that their opinions hold some weight in this situation, wouldn't you? And actually we have. There have been 5 or 6 that have come out. I can name a couple off the top of my head. We have Annie Farmer that came out a little bit ago. We have Elisa Arden, if I'm remembering correctly. Danielle Bensky said something along the lines of, all the work that we did to tell the world what happened to us, it's all being erased. That seems like it holds some weight to me, at least. And then, of course, Virginia Guthrie, she's been in the news over the course of the past 6 months after she committed suicide in April. She had an accident in, I believe, Perth, Australia, in which she was hit by a bus going 70 miles per hour, and she suffered acute renal failure. The doctor said she only had 4 days left to live, and she was able to overcome that at least for a couple more weeks before she ended her life, very unfortunately. And her family just wrote the judge this month, August 2025, through their attorney Sigrid McCauley, saying that redactions of third-party names in releases suggest a cover-up, and that the DOJ's claim of no further investigations was a cowardly abdication I love that word. If we can all use that word in a sentence today, that would be beautiful. She also left a note behind before her suicide. This wasn't necessarily a suicide note. It was coinciding with some other things that she was doing, but it was a handwritten note urging survivors to stand together to fight for the future of victims. Do it for the victims. Names can be erased. The names of victims, the faces of victims can be redacted easily. And through the context apparent in other parts of the files, in other paragraphs, and other sections, we can discern through contextual clues when a victim is being referenced and when it's somebody else, another third party that's being referenced, or their name is being erased. People aren't as dumb as you think, Richard Berman. Sorry to say that. And so, with all this said, what's the conclusion? Just as a recap, all that I'm trying to say here is Richard Berman, a Clinton-appointed New York District Court judge, has refused to release the grand jury documents. Is this a nothing burger? Is Berman correct in saying that it is a federal government through the Justice Department's job to compile a case and be transparent to the public? I would assume that this is usually the case, but this isn't a usual case. This is a special case. In fact, this is, I would argue, one of the most special cases that has ever been seen in this country. All the stuff that rests on this case, back whenever Trump was being indicted in the files, whenever Elon Musk tweeted out that, yeah, actually Trump is named in the files and it's not in a good way, there was a fissure in the right. And whenever that happens, you have people in the right, especially MAGA folks, saying, hey, we got to support Trump. We can't split apart. The Democrats will win. But this isn't about Democrats and Republicans. You've lost the plot. You've gone way past the mark, man. What this is evidence that government, that power, that the world isn't what it seems, that it doesn't run in the way that we've been taught it runs. There is a secret cabal of people, whatever form that takes, that hold power. And these people in positions of power are compromised. There are foreign tendrils within our government. There are people being manipulated. Jeffrey Epstein was the keystone of that. And just as this keystone is being removed, all of the other stones in this arch are beginning to fall away. And the evidence is in this grand jury document. The evidence is in documents that are currently being held by the federal government. And so I would say what we need to do is stand up for ourselves. Stand up for yourself. Don't let this slide under the table. As an individual voter, what exactly can you do? This isn't something that we're going to vote ourselves away from. Just like we saw in this past election, Trump kind of ran on the fact that he was going to release the Epstein files. He was our last hope. He was the last bull in the china shop that was going to go in and he was going to throw the deep state away. He was going to drain the swamp, as the famous pithy statement goes. And it didn't happen. This is only going to, and I don't know, I don't want to be too cynical and black pill to say that these files are never going to be released, that people are never going to be brought to justice, but it's looking more and more like it's going to be a very difficult path ahead. The only thing that we can do right now is don't let this slide under the table. In every comment section you see of every post that Donald Trump has been putting out, people are posting pictures of him and Epstein. Every post that Pam Bondi has submitted to the X platform over the course of the past months is filled with pictures of Epstein, pictures of the binders that were released with nothing burger information on them. And each of these posts is another reminder to each of these people that, yeah, the public is not going to forget about this. If there's any hill to die on, it is this. If there is any modern Rubicon to be crossed, any turning point, it is this. If there's any case in which you should put your foot down and say, I will burn this government to the ground, metaphorically, of course, it is this. So don't let them forget it. We got to speak through memes. We need to influence. We need to not manipulate, but be able to teach the upcoming generations about what is going on with this. The boomers aren't going to listen. They won't listen. Sorry, they can't be changed in their ways. But the people that are coming up into politics over the course of the next decade, the next 20 years, the next 30 years, they can be. And they speak through TikTok memes. So I don't know what should be done. I don't know what could be done. I don't know what has to be done for people to be brought to justice, but I would say remain hopeful. Always believe that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But don't get too naive. Don't get too cynical. Don't get too trusting. Don't get too distrusting. Just be rational. And leave a like on this video, subscribe,